News of that potential hate crime comes just weeks after a black teenager was killed by a white neighborhood watch captain in Florida. Federal authorities are now investigating the death of Trayvon Martin as a potential hate crime. I asked local radio talk show host Richard Fowler what's behind these attacks.
You know, that's a good question. I think what are behind these attacks is a fact that our country has not learned how to celebrate difference. And if we can celebrate difference instead of, I think, punishing difference, we'd be a better country, to be honest.
We have one case on the East Coast, one case on the West Coast that now coming to light. Is there a pattern here? Is there something that you see there?
Well, I don't know necessarily say there's a pattern, but in the Trayvon case in particular, I think this is a story of every African-American male. I think when you're growing up, you're taught, you know, be very kind to the police, don't run in a crowd if you see the police coming, because the police are automatically going to identify you as a suspect, even if you've done nothing wrong. When you walk in the mall, an old lady's going to grab her purse when you walk by. I think that's just part of sadly, it's part of the African-American story, which makes it part of the American story. And it's something that we have to have a discussion about to change it.
One would think that these are rather infrequent, that they happen occasionally, they pop up in the news here or there, but actually we were looking at some of the numbers and they're surprising to me. I want to get your take on it. According to the FBI, there were more than 6,600 hate crime incidents in 2010. Roughly half of them were reported to be racially motivated, mostly against blacks. About 5% were anti-Asian. Are things getting better or worse? And what's your thoughts on these statistics?
Well, I think what you see in any economic downturn is everybody tries to find somebody to blame. I think in this situation, we've used racism as a mask for classism in this country. You have 1% of the country that's wealthy and rich, and you have the 99% that's poor and struggling. And I think the 1% believes if you can, you know, divide the 99% and have them go against each other, you can have control. And I think that's what we've seen more and more of, is that African Americans have sort of been the problem in the country, because the president happens to be African American. He's part of the problem and why we don't have a great economy, so we take it out on, you know, our fellow citizens, and that's really just part of the problem. And I think the best way to solve it is we need to, like I said earlier, we need to celebrate difference instead of, you know, fighting against it.
Economic downturn, you know, one can think about the United States. There's been a lot of anti-immigration moves here in the U.S. We're also seeing that in France as well. Nicolas Sarkozy saying immigrants basically wants to limit immigration. What's at the heart of this? Is it always necessarily racism?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, in this particular situation, it is racism. In other situations, you know, it blurs the line, or we're not really sure if it is or if it isn't. But sometimes it is.
All right. Richard Fowler, thank you for coming in and talking to us today. Certainly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.